Well, it looks like there's going to be some real problems coming up, not only just for you and Covert Action Information Bulletin, but also for civil liberties in general in the United States and finding out what's happening, what our government is doing in our name covertly around the world. With the Intelligence Identities Protection Act just about to be passed in Congress, and with Reagan's Executive Order 12333, things are going to be quite different shortly, aren't they?
There is clearly a very marked escalation towards secrecy in this government. These two pieces of one legislation and one executive order. The executive order does not have to be propounded by Congress. Congress doesn't have a single word to say about it. Basically, these two working in tandem with each other, along with other efforts by this administration to embed the CIA and the other intelligence agencies, of which there are some 18 federal agencies, in secrecy.
This bill is the CIA's greatest operation without any qualifications. It's better than, in terms of their interest, than when they installed the Shah in power. It's better than the coup in Guatemala. And of course there are many failures from their own point of view. Better than putting Pinochet in power in terms of CIA values. What it is nothing less than an Official Secrets Act. This is the legislation that the CIA has been trying for 30 years to get, to give it legal protection and legal exemption from freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Now, what makes it such a beautiful operation is that it is in the process of being passed. It's going through the Congress more or less like a dose of the salts. With the Senate voted on it a couple of months ago, the vote was something like 90-2, and the House it's expected to pass by a similar majority, and yet the American people by and large, including media people, including television interviewers across the nation and journalists, are oblivious that it's even passing, much less what it really means. Now, what it really means, see, it's couched, and what makes it such a typical and beautiful CIA operation is that it's couched in the terms of protecting our agents who are out in the cold, risking their lives to defend the country. This is Senator Benson was the original sponsor of this bill, by the way. And this was what he said about it in many speeches here in Texas. Now it's passed to Senator John Chafee and Jake Garnes sponsoring the bill in Washington. Now, who can argue with that? Legal protection from our agents whose names are being exposed by irresponsible people who don't agree with the government's policies. Now, if the facts were that simple, if those were the true facts, who could argue with it? But the truth is that these agents' lives are not in danger because of their names being exposed. The truth is that these agents are functioning from embassies with diplomatic passports under circumstances in which, if the worst possibly happens and they're absolutely caught buying secrets from some local spy agent, a minister in the government or whatnot, the worst that will happen to them, even in the Soviet Union, is that they will be asked to leave the country. Under no circumstances will they ever be attacked or jailed or executed or whatnot.
By a government, another government.
By the host government,
right,
where they're living and breaking all the local laws by being a secret agent and recruiting spies and inducing people to commit treason. Now, in the 4 or 5 posts that I served in overseas full-time, we had full liaison with the president of the country, the chief of the police, and all the police officers and all the military officers. This means that we met with them weekly in the name of the CIA, no secrets, to have lunch or dinner and exchange information and do favors for each other. If there were ever a terrorist attack or threat against one of us, the first thing we would do would be to pick up the telephone and call the local police chief and say, hey, there's a threat against us. And I might note that this would also apply in the Soviet Union. If there were a terrorist threat in Moscow against the U.S. Embassy or a U.S. case officer or a CIA man, they would call the local police and say, you know, somebody's about to blow us up. There is a brotherhood of secret, quote, secret police agents that functions like a brotherhood even when they're supposedly on the other side. They're competing, but it's sort of like professional football players. They're on different teams, but they're still professional football players.
Well, you had buddies who were KGB agents.
Oh,
You
indeed. Played tennis with them, played chess with them, socialized with them, went drinking with them, and that was the SOP for all case officers everywhere. 2,000 plus, well over 2,000 names have been revealed, printed, published in the last few years, and not one agent has been killed because of his name being revealed.
Now, there were two cases where it looked like they were put-up jobs, right? Which the congressman and the CIA always mention as the reason
which
we
they
have to have
jumped
this.
on.
Yeah.
Richard Welch in Athens, the 18th of December in 1975, was killed. He was shot up by terrorists in front of his home. And at that moment, the church committee, which was in full session, was out of business. Washington, every door in Washington closed on the church committee because as though the church investigation had anything whatsoever to do with it. They flew him back and gave him a full state ceremony, which of course was admission that he was CIA to the world. I mean, the headlines were CIA chief killed. They didn't say the third secretary of embassy killed. The United States government made as much politics as they could out of the fact that this man was a career diplomat agent. Now, the fact was, they caught the terrorist that killed him, and they ascertained, they verified that those were the individuals who had published his name in an Athens newspaper 3 days before they killed him because they wanted world attention to what they were doing. And it had nothing to do with the investigations or publications in Washington, and they already planned to kill him. Now, this man had been ordered by CIA security to change houses because he was living in the same house that 8 other CIA station chiefs had lived in before him. Generation after generation after generation after generation of CIA station chiefs had lived in that same mansion. It was a big villa in a very posh part of Athens. As governments had changed, coups, the colonels' coups, the monarchy in and out of power much earlier, and dealing with all of the terrorist activities and anti-terrorist activities and coups in the Middle East from Athens, with the CIA heavily involved with each government and change of government and the ins and outs in these governments, and yet the CIA station chief was living in the same house throughout. Eventually he was killed. He refused to move because he said it was a good house. Now, there is no way that that can be blamed on U.S. journalists publishing names in Washington. Moreover, as I pointed out, the CIA director, Bill Colby, exploited that man's death to make a big issue and to effectively close down the church committee.
Which was investigating the CIA
which was
and
investigating
some of its malpractices.
The CIA's extensive malpractices. They put the church committee on the defensive and out of business. Now, there was one other incident in El Salvador where 2 agents who were under a labor cover were killed by by the government police, the secret police. They're treasury agents, is it, in El Salvador that do the killing down there. Now, these 2 guys were in contact with the government. They were killed by government agents, set up in a hotel and shot. And the United States announced to the world that they were secret agents. Their names had been published much previously, but the United States identified them, thereby admitting they were agents and admitting that they were using this labor organization as cover. Where did they make this announcement? They did it, the prosecuting attorney, the State Department's representative in the passport case in which they took Phil Agee's passport away from him, revealed the identities of these agents and claimed that that proved that people publishing their names led to their deaths. They were already dead when the government chose to use a totally fictitious, a totally false ploy to discredit Phil Agee. He had not revealed their names. And so it's now in the Supreme Court records. It's cited by the Supreme Court justices in their decision against Phil Agee and his passport, him keeping his passport, these agents being killed, i.e. the Supreme Court and the State Department revealed their identities to accomplish their objective against Phil Agee.
There was another situation in Jamaica where it looked like it was a planned put-up job.
Now in that case, indeed, the chief of station's house was shot up with machine gun bullets, and so they made considerable propaganda publicity out of that with photographs of the bullets. But it's true his name had been published, but what happened is the back wall of his garage, well away from the house, received 5 machine gun bullets at a time when his family was out of the country and he was not in the house. And yet they tried to use that to make publicity to show that it made it dangerous to have the names
It
revealed.
was also during an election where the opposition to the social democratic government wanted to make it appear that terrorism was rampant in Jamaica. And so wasn't there some political exploitation?
Oh, indeed. There was considerable political exploitation of it, and all evidence points that it was the government secret police that fired the bullets.
Right.
But again, the press in Washington cooperated with the CIA to give publicity for the bill against the exposing of names.
So there's no real need for the bill. It's not protecting in any way our national security. It's not required by the history of the CIA.
Precisely. On the one hand, that's the problem, and I go a bit further to point out that these agents, 80% of them were identified from overt information in the Library of Congress. The people publishing the Covert Action Information Bulletin go to the Library of Congress and go through the State Department's overt records of its personnel and come up with the CIA officers' names infallibly, because there are little indicators in there which anyone can go in and read through and say, that's CIA, and that's CIA, and that's CIA.
Plus, isn't it just generally known in most CIA stations who is CIA?
It's
Don't they want
universally known.
themselves to be known?
We used to call
get contacts and information.
We used to call it wearing an invisible badge. You acted as though you had a badge, CIA up here. You drew people to you. I'm CIA, talk to me. You were taught to do this. Alan Dulles, and the original CIA great, in his book, The Craft of Intelligence, makes this point that you have to be known to be an effective intelligence officer. But see, that's on the one hand. The bill is not necessary, and it's dishonest in that sense. It's based on false premises. On the other hand, the bill is so written that it goes far beyond the protection of agents' names. For example, the bill is so written that it will be a felony for agents' names to be published even if they're already, to republish the names, even if they've already been published, as in the Library of Congress or anywhere else. It also includes activities of agents, so that you can, if an agent kicks in the door of your house and rapes your wife or whatever, and you publish a story about it without citing the name, it would still be a felony.
Under the executive order, so we have to see both the executive order and the Intelligence Identities Bill as almost part of a package. Under the executive order, the CIA now will be allowed, and is allowed since it was signed in December by the President, it is now law, the CIA will be allowed to carry out covert activities in the United States, as well as all the other agencies too. So that if you were to discover, for example, that a member of an intelligence agency had infiltrated, say, your church organization, your student organization, a trade union, or whatever organization, or any group of more than 2 people was infiltrated, and you discovered this, and you so much as mentioned it to a friend without even writing a news article or without even talking about it on the media, on television, for example, you could be held criminally liable under this bill. And we're talking about a bill which authorizes or which penalizes persons for 15 years in prison, 5 years in prison, $15,000 fine, or both, for persons who've never worked in the government. And that's a pretty heavy price to have to pay to try and hold up your rights, to stand up for your rights against the onslaught of the intelligence agencies.
Now, the New York Times, to give you the proof of the argument that this is an official Secrets Act, the New York Times, in questioning the sponsors of the bill on the floor of the Senate, pointed out that as it was written, if the London Times published a story about CIA activities and the station chief, some scandal of some kind, the New York Times couldn't republish the London Times story without committing a felony. And the sponsor of the bill slapped his hand on the table and said, that's right, we want to knock off all this criticism of the CIA.
Well, the situation has already come up with the revelation of CIA activity in Iran recently, which was not published in the United States for very long, but eventually it got either Washington Post or the New York Times did it, and there was a big uproar because they were publishing it.
And in the last hearings, the New York Times questioning again Senator Chafee about this bill, said that as they read it, they would not be able to publish their very legitimate and valuable stories about the activities of CIA agents Ed Wilson and Frank Turple, who were selling terrorist technology to Libya after they left the CIA, without committing a felony. And Senator Chafee said, yes, in the future the Washington Post and the New York Times will have to be careful what they publish about the CIA.